Hey, this is a major story. Very quietly, because it hasn't been covered much in media, and when it's covered, it's totally understated as no big deal. Democrats and Republicans are working together to deregulate banks in a way that is reminiscent of what led to the 2008 Great Recession. And they could be working on gun safety. They could be working on making sure that the Trump-Russia investigation that Robert Mueller is doing is full and fair. They could be working together, Democrats and Republicans, on climate change, on getting everybody some basic level of health care, or thinking about, I don't know, universal basic income. But instead, the issue that seems to be bringing Democrats and Republicans together is figuring out a way to let banks make more money. And the idea here is to rewrite parts of the 2010 Dodd-Frank Act, which did some regulation of banks in response to the 2008 financial crisis. And while not all members of the Senate support this, it's probably going to pass because about a dozen Democrats do support it, in addition to just about every, if not every, Republican. The House has already passed another version of this that's even more extreme in how it undoes the 2010 Dodd-Frank bill. So what would the bill actually do? Well, we've got a list of the major things that the bill would do. Number one, it would increase the bank size threshold for banks being subject to federal oversight from $50 billion to $250 billion in assets. And the explanation is that the way the bill was originally written, it was hurting small banks by over-regulating them, so that the new bill will make it so that banks between 50 and 250 billion in assets would be less regulated than they have been, and there would also be less oversight from the Federal Reserve. It's basically a sham, right? They want you to think that your local little bank was impacted by this regulation. But I hate to break it to you, the banks that are currently between 50 and $250 billion in assets are pretty damn big banks, like American Express, BB&T, SunTrust Bank, KeyBank. These are not your little neighborhood banks that were over-regulated as a result of this. Number two, we would see provisions to lower anti-discrimination standards. And the way that this new bill would do that is by raising the number of loans a bank is allowed to make before it has to provide discrimination or non-discrimination in lending data to oversight agencies. Who benefits from that? Nobody. Number three, this bill will allow foreign banks to separate American assets in order to avoid American regulatory scrutiny. And yes, they are trying to sell this by throwing in some small benefits for tiny banks and credit unions to make it seem like everybody's going to benefit. It's sort of going to equally help banks of all sizes, but the benefit is to the mega banks. And also, they're throwing in a few little consumer protection things. But the truth is, this doesn't do away yet anyway. That's another of Trump's ideas. This doesn't do away with the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So again, the little things that are being sprinkled in there are mostly to be able to paint a more PR-friendly picture of this bill. This is one of those areas where the Republicans and the Democrats alike mostly agree and are basically screwing us. The Financial Times found that the banks that stand to gain the most from this deregulation have been upping their donations to Democrats in the Senate. I guess they already have all of the Republicans. They don't need to up their donations there. Plain and simple, this is not a time to weaken bank regulations, right? This is not something that defends working people. This doesn't propagate more equality throughout society. People defend this as doing not that much deregulation, but that's the wrong conversation, right? The conversation should be, why are we doing any deregulation when there are so many other things that we could be doing to actually help people? And people will defend this, as I mentioned, by saying, David, don't worry, it doesn't impact the CFPB. That's fine, but it's deregulation that we don't need, and it's part of the swamp-filling campaign finance status quo that we should be vehemently against and that the president claimed to be against. The sickest part here is the bragging about bipartisanship. They are touting this as a big bipartisan victory. Republicans and Democrats figuring out a way to work together, woohoo. They're able to work together, not surprisingly, for the benefit of an industry that funds their campaigns and to make changes that will bring no net gain to the average consumer. It's absolutely disgusting. And I hope that people on our subreddit will discuss this because it is a really big issue. It's not as sexy sounding or as salacious or titillating, but it's a major issue. And you can find those discussions at davidpakman.com/Reddit. Today's program is made possible in part by Futur. Futur is a social forecasting game where you compete with other players to predict the future. And it's built on the principles of what's called a prediction market, a scientifically proven way of using the wisdom of the crowd to create more accurate predictions about future events. Prediction markets have been shown to work much better than other forecasting methods like polling or expert analysis in many cases. And Futur has actually taken the concept and turned it into a fun, easy to use social game. You open up the Futur app and you'll see a whole range of forecasts covering topics across the board, from politics to sports and everything in between. You can check out my predictions and follow me to get updates on my profile, which is linked to in the description if you're watching this on YouTube. Futur is a great tool to find out more about the world, improve your forecasting ability, show off your prediction skills to friends, and even better, when you make predictions on Futur, you're helping to create more accurate forecasts for everybody. Their mission of creating better predictions is great, and actually going in there and seeing how well you can do at predicting the future can be kind of addicting. Go to futur.com, sign up, and start making forecasts. It's free, and it's available on both Android and iOS, as well as on web browsers, and that's FUTUUR.com.